Welcome to Wicked Shizuku's Reviews, bringing you a southern perspective on books, movies, music, and much, much more. Stick around for a while, you just might hear something wicked. Well, hello everyone, and welcome back to Wicked Shizuku's Reviews, and this is episode 32. Tuesday playlist. I'm going to read us a brave deed tonight out of the book of a book of brave deeds, and it's going to be a short episode tonight. So, without fear and without reproach, from Heroes of Chivalry. How the good knight Bayard kept a bridge over the river Garillion for the space of half an hour, single-handedly against 200 Spaniards, and of many things which happened in 5 years in France, Italy, and Spain. Towards the close of the war between the French and Spaniards in the kingdom of Naples, the two parties were for some time encamped on the opposite banks of the river Garillion. You must know that if there were brave and gallant commanders on the side of the French, so were there also on that of the Spaniards, and among others in the great Captain Gonzalvo Ferrande, a wise and wary man, and another called Pedro de Paz. He was but 2 cubits in height, but a bolder creature could not be found, and he was so humpbacked and so short that when he was on horseback one could only see his head above the saddle. One day this Pedro de Paz resolved to give the French an alarm, and cross the river at a ford he was acquainted with about 120 horse. Having placed behind each horseman a foot soldier armed with a hacquebut, Hacquebut, hacquebut. His object was to draw the French upon him and induce them to abandon the bridge, while the Spaniards should attack it in force and gain it. He executed his enterprise admirably, and gave the French so sharp and warm an alarm that they all thronged to that quarter, thinking it was the whole effort of the Spaniards. The good knight, who was always desired to be where blows were exchanged, was quartered near the bridge with a brave gentleman called the Squire Lebasco, squire of the stables to the King of France, Louis XII. These lost no time when they heard the noise, in arming and getting to horse, proposing to go to the quarter where the affair was going on. But the good knight, looking over the river, perceived about 200 Spanish horse making straight for the bridge, which they would have gained with little resistance, and that would have been the total destruction of the French army. He desired his companion to go and collect some men as quickly as possible to defend the bridge, or they would all be lost, and promised to do his best to keep them in play until his return. He then went lance in hand to the bridge on the other side, of which were the Spaniards, already prepared to pass, but like a furious lion he put his lance in rest, and charged the troop who were already upon the bridge, so that 3 or 4 of them were overthrown, of whom two fell into the water and never rose again, for the river was wide upon and deep. This done, they cut him out plenty of work, for he was already so fiercely assailed, that but for his excellent chivalry, he could not have kept them at bay. But he backed his horse against the barrier of the bridge, that they might not get in his rear, and like a chafed tiger, defending himself so well with his sword that the Spaniards knew not what to say, and thought he was no man, but a fiend. In short, he maintained his post long and well, till Lebasco arrived with about 100 men at arms, who made the Spaniards abandon the bridge, and were pursuing them a good mile beyond, when they perceived a large body of 700 or 800 horse coming to the enemy's support. The good knight said to his companions, "Gentlemen, we have done enough today. In having saved the bridge, let us retreat and compact a body as possible." They did at a good rapid pace, the good knight bringing up their rear and receiving every charge of the enemy. At length he began to be sore pressed from his poor horse failing him through weariness, for he had fought on him the whole day. At this juncture a large body of the enemy made a fresh charge on the French, some of whom were borne to the ground. The good knight's horse was driven backward against a ditch, where he was surrounded by 20 or 30 who cried, "Yield, Signor, yield!" He was still fighting, and could only say, "Gentlemen, I must needs yield, for alone I cannot resist your numbers." His comrades were already at some distance retiring straight for their bridge, when one of them, named Godfrey, a gentleman of Dauphiny, exclaimed, "Oh, gentlemen, we have lost all. The good Captain Bayard is dead or prisoner, for he is not with us, and today he has led us so well and gotten us so much honor. I vow to God that if I must go alone, I will return and be slain or taken, but I will have some news of him." I know not of which of the troop was most grieved when they found that Godfrey spoke the truth. They all dismounted, looked over their girths, and remounting, galloped with invincible courage after the Spaniards, who were leading away the flower and jewel of all knighthood, solely by the failure of his horse. You must know that the Spaniards, confident in their numbers, did not condescend to disarm the good knight whom they were carrying off, nor to take from him his sword, though they deprived him of a battle axe he carried in his hand. And as they marched, kept asking him who he was, he who knew well that if he told him his name, he would never escape alive, for the Spaniards feared him more than any Frenchman, replied merely that he was a gentleman. Meanwhile, his comrades came up crying, "France, France! Turn, Spaniards, turn! You bear not off thus the flower of chivalry." The Spaniards, in spite of their numbers, were astonished at this cry. Nevertheless, they received without flinching this heavy charge of the French, though some of the best mounted of them were borne to the ground. Seeing this, the good knight, who needed but a horse, leaped from his own, and without putting foot in stirrup, bounded on a noble steed, whose rider, Salvador de Borgia, a gallant gentleman, had been borne to the earth by the Squire Lebasco. When he found himself mounted, he commenced wondrous feats of arms, crying, "France, France! 'Tis Bayard, Bayard, you have let escape." When the Spaniards heard the name, and perceived their error, and having left him his arms without requiring him to yield, rescue or no rescue, for had he once given his word, he would never have broken it. Their hearts failed them, and wheeling about, they retreated at a gallop to their camp. And the French, overjoyed to have recovered their true guidon of honor, returned merrily to their quarters, where they talked of nothing for a week but of their brilliant adventure and the feats of the good knight. To enumerate the virtue of the good knight were superfluous. All things pass away, but the love of God. Suffice it then to say that he loved God above all things. He never swore or blasphemed, and in all his affairs and necessities he never had recourse to him, being fully persuaded that by him and his infinite goodness all things are ordered. Nor did he ever leave his chamber without recommending himself to him in prayer. He loved his neighbor as himself, and never possessed a crown, but it was at the service of the first who needed it. He was a great almsgiver, and he gave it in secret. He succored widows in distress, and during his life had given in marriage 100 poor orphan girls, gentlefolk, and others. If a gentleman under his command was dismounted, he remounted him, and in a manner not to offend his delicacy, often exchanging a Spanish charger worth 200 or 300 crowns for a nag worth but 6, and giving the gentleman to understand that the latter was just the horse to suit himself. And here's a illustration of Bayard. So graciously did he confer his gifts. He was a sorry flatterer, and never swerved from speaking the truth, were it to the greatest of princes. He looked with contempt upon his world's wealth, and was at his death no richer than at his birth. In war none excelled him. In conduct he was Fabius Maximus. In enterprise he was Coriolanus, and in courage and magnanimity a second Hector. Dreadful to the enemy, gentle and courteous to his friends. 3 qualities marked him for a perfect soldier. He was a greyhound in attack, a wild boar in defense, and a wolf in retreat. In short, it would take a good orator his life to recount all his virtues. I, who am unskilled in learning, cannot pretend to it, but I humbly pray all readers of this history to be indulgent to what I have written, for I have done my best, though far short of what was due to the praise of so perfect and virtuous a person as the good knight, without fear and without reproach, the gentle Lord de Bayard, whose soul may God of his holy grace receive into paradise. Amen. Here endeth the very joyous, pleasant, and refreshing history of the feats, exploits, triumphs, and achievements of the good knight, without fear and without reproach, the gentle Lord de Bayard. And that was a Tuesday read of Wicked Shizuku's reviews. I hope you enjoyed, and we shall see you next time. Have a good evening. Good night.